Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
It's plain and simple, ladies and gentlemen. Action knows no boundaries, and if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with, once more, as always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And between you and me, if you like how we're doing things around here, please subscribe to the podcast. Give us the old like and the subscribe, a like, a 5-star rating. Basically, wherever you get your podcasts. We're over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. And also, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel, so if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we'd really appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I say this a lot, but it's the most important, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large, because if we like to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it, so please pay us a visit. On this episode, we got a fun one. We're diving into a little bit of action from overseas, specifically our friends over in South Africa. It had its this is a film that had its premiere at the Fantasia International Festival for genre and horror, genre, sci-fi, all that kind of stuff. But it's called Indemnity. It is an excellent action thriller where an ex-firefighter is forced to fight for his life after being accused of murdering his wife. It is from the writer-director Travis Taute, and it's a real good example of action cinema done on a budget and done overseas. Like, action translates everywhere, and this is a hell of a movie, and it's really entertaining. And we did tape this a little while ago. It was back around Fantasia, but we had a great talk with Travis, and I hope you enjoy it. But also check out Indemnity, which is on your favorite video on demand platforms like Apple, Google, things like that right now. But enjoy our talk with Travis because it's a good one. First off, thank you for the time today, man. I really appreciate this.
Likewise. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Now, obviously, congratulations on the movie. I thought it was great. I guess walk me through the initial sort of idea for the story.
Cool. Wow, where to begin? So you know, growing up, I loved action films. I think it was like my favorite genre. So I kind of knew that I always wanted to make an action film as my first feature. And I kind of, you know, in its design, I was thinking about, you know, the kind of films that really influenced me the most as a young filmmaker, or wannabe filmmaker, let me say that. And it really was these kind of like mid-90s, early noughties kind of action thriller where, you know, they were these awesome set pieces really grounded in something quite emotional and something character driven. And so the idea was always to make, you know, to use that kind of design and create a film out of that. But essentially, the inspiration actually came from an article I stumbled upon years ago. And I was reading about soldiers who had returned from war and how they were struggling to adapt or readapt into society, you know, with PTSD. And it really got me thinking, and I went down this massive rabbit hole, and I started doing researches on first responders here in South Africa, and just in terms of, you know, how they dealt with, you know, really like insane traumas, essentially, and with not having the facility to actually cope with that or deal with that in a really, really healthy way. And then it was sort of a combination of this and my own personal experience and what I had learned over the years and really wanted to start a conversation around the stigma attached to mental health. And how I could use that in a vehicle as a film through an entertaining medium, which is what we set out to do, to make this really ambitious, really sort of action-oriented, you know, genre piece that still dealt with a topic that was really, really important to me, which was that of trauma and PTSD more specifically. And I found that just in doing research, it was such a fascinating topic to explore, and just realizing how, especially here in South Africa, I mean, I can only speak from my personal experience, but essentially in particular reference to men of color, and the stigma attached to mental health, and how everything is just swept under the carpet and not really dealt with in a very, very sort of healthy way. And that really was the impetus for where the emotional sort of character arc in that journey that we see Theo go through in the film, it was really born out of that. And then taking that idea and kind of superimposing it onto what I loved about sort of action films, and the result was the film that you watched.
Now, I mean, obviously, like you said, you're telling a story with a lot of layers. There's a real sort of depth and sort of real character-driven piece at the same time. But at the same time, you've got to find someone who can handle the action as well. So, I mean, I guess talk to me a little bit about casting and finding Jarrid and finding sort of the right people for the right roles.
Yeah, it was a very interesting experience because I mean, I don't know how much you know about the South African film industry here in general, but we don't really have movie stars. We have TV stars, we have soapy stars, and those are kind of like our big celebrities, people that they see on television every single day. And so we really wanted to create an action hero. I wanted to see someone that is representative of the makeup of this country in terms of how diverse it is, and see that person portrayed in a very sort of aspirational kind of way. And so we set out to, I mean, gosh, we must have seen quite a number of people, like everyone who's who here in South Africa. We had auditioned for this role. And Jarrid came in with this really intense vulnerability, which was so unique in that casting tape that it was instant for me. When I saw his tape, I was like, this is the guy. And then in having this conversation with him, I realized he's quite a fit guy. Like he's incredibly agile, and he maintains his health quite well. And so he really was an easy choice for me. And when we got to making the film, I mean, I must give this guy all the credit that he deserves. He did all his own training. So every single stunt himself, including the stunt where you see him hanging out a 21st story window, that was really him. No green screen, just, casually hanging out the side of the building. And it was quite incredible. He was game for all of it. He prepared for about 3 months of like intensive conditioning and physical like training in terms of fight choreography. And I had an amazing and incredible team of stunt coordinators and fight choreographers that I worked with, guys who've been working on the likes of like Mad Max Fury Road and Tomb Raider. So they'd done all these big sort of international productions, these productions that came and shot in South Africa. But we really, in terms of South Africa and our film industry, action is a genre we don't get to play in quite often. And it's largely in part due to finance. Action is expensive to produce, and there's a particular kind of film that makes money here. And so we really wanted to change that. We wanted to show people what is possible, and change the perception on the kind of film that can be produced here. And I was incredibly fortunate, like I said, with Jarrid, being able to embody the physical necessities that the role required of him, but then also being able to bring this really interesting emotional vulnerability to the character. And I felt like that was really important for me, was I often find, I mean, these days there's so many action films and spectacle is everything. But I find sometimes it's only spectacle, and you really, if you don't sort of ground it in a really like important or in an emotional arc, I kind of find myself disengaging. And so that is what I try to set out to do from the outset, was really ground this character and ground this film in a more emotional arc, and have the action then just, be the kind of thing that audience take away and go, oh, that's awesome. That's a great bonus. But on top of that, beyond all the entertaining set pieces, it really just was a story about this guy's redemption. And so, yeah, Jarrid was amazing. I had the absolute blast working with him, incredibly professional, and just brought his A game like 24/7. And he was surrounded by a team, of other actors who, it's a combination of sort of industry veterans and some new faces. His son in the film had never acted in anything before. So that was quite an awesome find, being able to sort of really work with this young actor and mold him. But for the most part, just incredibly grateful to have had this talented cast and crew that made the film possible.
No, I mean, that's fantastic. And I mean, I love that you say that because, I mean, especially for you as a first-time filmmaker, I can imagine there were unimaginable pressures on you to sort of create more spectacle and cut back on the character. Because I mean, I think that's the thing about this film that stood out for me is that it's about a desperate guy who's he's not an action hero. He's a guy who's put in a situation that doesn't have a choice.
Yeah,
And that
exactly.
really sort of lets the emotion of it all come out. Like, how important was it for you to sort of fight that? I mean, I guess maybe that internal struggle between people going, no, we can sell it more if there's more spectacle versus no, it's true to the story, you know?
Yeah. Fortunately, I had a really great team of producers who really were open to me convincing them as to why we need to ground this film in something more emotional. I think, at the end of the day, we knew the film had a certain amount of set pieces in terms of action stunts, and we kind of only had a very small window to achieve all of this. Like, for example, the car crash scene early on in the film, we really had one vehicle. There was no budget for another vehicle, so it was like we are throwing everything we have, and hopefully the stunt goes according to plan. So we knew either way that we were limited to what we could do with the action. And so a lot of it was designed purposefully to try and limit the scale. So it was in the back of a vehicle or in an elevator, or things we had control over versus, trying to create this spectacle of scale that we really couldn't afford to do. And so knowing that, and also knowing that it was important for me. Like, I'm more of a drama actor. I enjoy the drama in between the spectacle, and so that was really, really like important for me. And trying to ground this film in something that I think people could resonate with emotionally. And I had the backing of an amazing team of producers, and so that really wasn't too much of a fight, actually. At the end of the day, we watched the film. We went, like, when we were busy in the offline, there were various versions and various cuts where we tried to, have it be a little bit more action orientated. And then as we were going through, just so that we could see what it could all feel like, we came to the ultimate conclusion that the right way to do this was just to really anchor the story in one man's traumatic experience. And so fortunately, yeah, like I said, I had a team that was willing to buy into that. And actually just, let me do my thing and allow me the freedom to achieve that.
And I mean, something else that I think you do really well here is just especially when you see independent action films, there can be stuff that goes along, and then there's going to be that obvious one shot with a bad effect that kind of takes you out of the whole moment. And you don't have that here. I mean, how important was it for you to sort of keep the action appropriate to the scale of your budget? You weren't trying to sort of overshoot on anything.
Yeah, no, that was incredibly important. And you know what, that is so true. And it's something that I recognize quite a lot in terms of how quickly 1 second on screen can just sort of take you out of that moment, and you just lose that believability element. And I think that was really, really important. So like I think we purposely set out to do things or achieve things that were achievable, actually. So in terms of the team that I was working with, they're such professionals, and it was amazing to be able to really work and mold every sequence with these like fight choreographers. And like I said, it was trying to be very smart about it. Like, let's contain this to an elevator, because that fight could have easily been anywhere else, and automatically you're moving, and it just takes that much longer to film. Right. And so it really was a conscious decision to know, okay, we can achieve this. Can we achieve it, and can we do it well? Let's go for that. And all of the sequences across the film, they were like sort of pillars, as we refer to them. And we really were like, okay, cool. How do we achieve this? How do we achieve this? In terms of, the actual way we went about filming it, I try to do everything practical, because I find oftentimes that moment that occurs is when that CGI is just not up to scratch. And that would bum me out, like totally when watch the film and go, oh, but it was great, but then there's this one moment, and because I do that all the time with films, and so really we worked exceptionally hard to try and to not have that happen. And then coupled with that, I also had an amazing VFX team, a company called Motif, who also do a lot of work on sort of international projects, and there's a small team of VFX artists, and they're really, when we set out to do the film, we had counted which shots were going to be VFX shots, and it was like less than 100 or something like that. And then you make the film and you realize, oh crap, I've got a lot more VFX shots than that. But they were amazing. They were such team players, and fortunately it wasn't that much because we did a lot of it practical. So a lot of the fire sequences you see, they were all sort of, they were there, they were practical, the actors got to interact with them. And then it was just about building on top of that as opposed to recreating something completely in CGI from scratch. And I think that is where we managed to avoid the pitfall of that one moment that everyone goes, oh man.
For sure. Now, I'm curious because, obviously this is your first feature, and obviously going in, you're going to have hopes and aspirations and sort of plans, but at the end, I'm sure maybe there were things that you learned and happened that maybe you didn't expect. Like during this whole process, is there anything that you learned about sort of filmmaking in general that maybe you didn't expect to learn?
I learned so much, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it was one of those things where, so just an interesting story. We started, the film was in development for quite a number of years. It had gone through various iterations in the script. And then we finally got fully financed towards the end of 2019. And then we started production in March 2020. We got 3 weeks into production when our president was like, guys, a hard lockdown, sorry, you need to call it here. So that was devastating, to be honest, because we weren't sure when we were going to go back. No one knew what the hell was happening in the world. And then we were fortunate enough, a couple of, I think it was June last year, about 3 months later, we had dropped a restriction level in the country, and we were like, we have this opportunity, let's go in right now and just finish the last sort of 3 weeks of principal photography, which was very interesting because we were kind of the guinea pigs for the industry, because no one had gone back to filming just yet. So the local sort of film body were setting out all these protocols, like you cannot do intimate scenes, you cannot do physical, like fight sequences, and we were like, crap, we're making an action film, how are we going to do this? So it took a lot of, there was a lot to navigate. But like I said, all thanks to this team of incredible people who really believed in the project. I think that was something, that I'm very, very fortunate to have had a team of people who really just understood what we were trying to do. We were trying to change the perception of the kinds of films people can expect to see from South Africa. Like I mentioned earlier, finances sort of dictate the kind of film that you have to make here. And previously we've had this sort of very omnipresent theme of like apartheid or social injustice that formed a core part of all South African films, but we love genre. We watch action films, we watch sci-fi, we watch fantasy. So we really just wanted to make an entertaining film. And I think everyone really bought into that, which I was like very, very, very stoked about. But as to what I learned, how long it takes to do a stunt, you kind of think, I've got today I need to achieve 3 pages of script, but there's a stunt in between. So that stunt is like, here's my 12-hour day. That stunt's going to take me 10 hours, which leaves me like 2 hours for like this much. So it was super interesting. It was an interesting balance of doing action, which I've always been fascinated by, and getting to make it is also just so much fun. But I'd say that it's hard. Filmmaking in general is incredibly hard to try and put something together and make it an entertaining. I think there's a lot of challenges that people really don't sort of expect in terms of how much as a director, you obviously you're involved in every single department, and then you're working with actors and making sure that you're there for them on a psychological and emotional level. And it really is, I think the thing that I learned the most is patience. and making sure that you listen. It's such a collaborative industry. And I find, and what was amazing is that in terms of what I learned about myself as well, is that, you really don't know everything. Like, I think I have a good understanding of character and story, but in my head, I'm like, oh, I want the car to do this. And then someone will be like, okay, cool, you want to do that, but you have to take this in mind. So I think across the board, there were so many things I learned across the making of this film, which is just incredibly exciting and valuable. And I think you can go to film school, but there's nothing like making a film to teach you the stresses, that everything that comes with it.
That moment when you realize you don't know feels like a very formative moment, sort of across the board in any sort of filmmaker's career. I'm kind of curious, just to start putting a bow on this. Like, if you think back to your younger years, like, was there can you narrow it down to like a moment or a movie that was sort of the pivot point for you that got you into this business?
Yes, I can. It was the very first Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
Nice.
I had always loved film, and I'd always loved filmmaking, but it was never really, I never considered it an option as a career. Also because I think back when, there wasn't even a film school here, it never ever entered my mind that would be a possibility. And then I watched this film, which I'm ashamed to say, I'm one of those people who, I never read the books. When I was in high school, like everyone else had, it's like a staple in terms of, and I love fantasy as well. And I hadn't known about it. And then this film came out and I saw this trailer and I was like, what is that? And I went to cinema, and I think I went and watched it the Friday. By Sunday, I had seen it 6 times.
Yeah, I love it.
And I was like, this is incredible. It was so moving to connect with an audience member, the way that film connected with me and what it did for me and how it inspired me. There's nothing that can sort of take that away. And so that really was a turning point for me where I was like, I've got to do this. I've got to do this.
You know what, man? Thanks for the good work on this film and creating something and putting it out there into the canon of films out there that people are going to enjoy, and keep doing the good work. I look forward to the next one. And thanks for the time today, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoteo@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.